where we are the future. We're going to bring the future real estate.
We are the future of real estate.
What is it again? Welcome to the Teaming Up Show, your resource to the future of real estate. I'm Josh Pomerleau, joined by Brian McWhite, and we're going to talk about a question that I had in one of my last classes.
This question came up about grit. Where does grit come from? How do you find that? It was just a really interesting question that we thought would make a useful video.
You know, in the context of the class, it was a perfect place to bring that up, and it was like that. It made a lot of sense. So becoming just a video about grit is like, okay, how do we narrow that down to getting as impactful as possible? And that's where a lot of people go with your big why. During the class, after about an hour and a half, people were like, all the information we were giving them, and like, how do I just take all that passion, all that just momentum, and then bring that in my real estate business? And I mean, and that's a really good question, because I think that's why so many books will spend a lot of time, especially in the beginning, will talk about what's your big why are you doing this? Because if it's just about the money, that won't be enough, because basically you have to be not a logical person to start a real estate business, because it's going to suck for so much time and not be worth it in the beginning. Where if you did the equation, you're going to say, well, I'd be better off doing something else, because for the next 3 years, this is going to suck compared to this.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think one of the things you're getting at is that money isn't a useful thing until you actually apply it to something. So what do you, if you want to make money in real estate, what for? What are you trying to accomplish? What do you want to get? Now, for some people, that could be a charitable cause. For some people, that could be the kind of life they want to live. It could be that you want to go to Disney World. Whatever it is, you have to actually make that money into something, some kind of big why that drives you in business.
Yeah, and people will get lost into thinking, I got to find the ultimate why. I got to find the why that is going to change my life forever. And what I have found is that it changes. I mean, it's okay for it to change. You should always have something, though, that is outside of maybe just benefiting you, because you're going to be able to pull and say, well, I'm doing this not only for me and my life goals, but I'm doing it for Brian, I'm doing it for this person, I'm doing it for this person, and that will pull you to get through the days that just aren't worth getting through.
Because you can picture, you can visualize that thing that you want. Right. One of my first sales trainers ever told me that you have to make something you want this year. You have to have a huge why, of course.
Right.
An overall life why, but also you want to have something that's very specific. This year, I want to have a down payment for my house. This year, I want to go to Disney World with my kids, whatever it is. Right. Now, the big why is a little bit different than grit, I think.
Okay. That's great.
In some ways, I think grit is something that you either have or you don't.
So it's okay. So I kind of agree. I agree with that.
You're either going to drive through the things that are discouraging. You're either going to do the sometimes mind-numbing things that need to get done every day to accomplish your goals, or you're just not going to do them.
And I agree. I agree with that 100%, because I was talking about that with Chris on our drive back from our class, and I was like, but if, say you're a person that doesn't, say you're Brian McWhite, you're 20 years old, and you don't have that, and your 37-year-old Brian McWhite does have that, what is the one, and we didn't practice this wasn't prepared, but what is the one or two things that you would say to that person and say to get them the grit? Because I think that grit and the why or whatever, you can say there's 5 reasons why you would have grit. How can you get that person who's 20 years old, give them grit?
Yeah.
What would be the one thing you could say or do for them to get that?
That's my answer is that you can't. My answer is you can't.
You absolutely cannot.
But in place of grit,
that sucks. Sorry.
No. In place of grit, I think you have a big why. And maybe over time grit develops. But a big why can drive somebody just as hard as grit can. Just innate grit can. If it's something that's that you can visualize, that you can really work toward, and that really excites you, makes you passionate. Because you were going to have so many days where it's just not exciting to be at work. It's not exciting to make the next phone call, to send the next email. But if you have that why right in the front of your mind, it will drive you.
And then that will basically create some grit. So
I think so.
One more question before we wrap up this episode. Okay, you closed 100 and some transactions last year all by himself, listings. Because that you must have grit to do that, right?
I think that I probably am one of the people who do have grit because I have a big why, but it's not something that drives me every day. I tend to be the kind of person who comes in and knows what's in front of me to do that day, and I'm just going to plow through it whether I really want to or not.
But why? So why do you do that?
I don't know the answer to that question.
You can't, because I would say if you look in your life in maybe multiple areas, you have some of that and everywhere. Yep. There has to be something that you wake up where you're just mad at the world, or you go to bed.
I'm not mad at you, world.
you're so you have a chip on your shoulder, right? Yeah. Something that's saying like, I don't want to be second place.
That's exactly it.
That's it. I don't want to be second place. That's as simple as that.
I think that there's something in really driven agents, really driven salesmen that just says,
driven basketball players?
Exactly. Okay. Yep. I refuse to fail. I refuse to be on the JV team. I refuse to not hit these numbers, whatever it might be. And I've been given that. I don't know if I've been given that over the years by parents or coaches or whatever it might be, but what would you say? Where does yours come from?
So what would I say? And that's kind of what I was talking about before. I think things shift. I think in the beginning I would have said I wanted to make enough money so I could survive because
sure.
I didn't want to live at my parents' house anymore. I did not want nice things. That's not what drove me. I didn't say I want a big house. I don't want all these cars. I said I want to be able to make some decisions when I want to be able to do that. So there was a level there where that drove me for my first 5 years because that's what my first 5 years looked like. After that, and which I always knew, I wanted to be in the business with the best people on the planet. Because the reason when then you say, why would you want that? Well, because when you're with the best, that's when it's like if you get married, do you want like the best spouse? I mean, do you want a spouse that's just kind of average, that kind of you have average life experiences with? You have, I think the same thing with being in the business with the best people is that it raises all experiences.
Sure.
So when I look back in the next 30 years, when we decide together that we want to go change, a city or change a couple people's lives or whatever that looks like, the great people together because we thought bigger can do more.
Sure.
And so that's right. I think that's where it drives it for me. It's tough. I mean, there's a lot of days where it's like you're in the grind and you're doing some low dollar activity or whatever, and you just have to get through it.
Yeah.
But
I think marriage.
It's hard.
I think marriage is actually a great illustration of the difference between big why and grit. Because when you get married, you have a big why. You want happiness, you want a family, you want a partner, and all these things. But at some point, every marriage goes through hard times, and both spouses change, and it turns into grit time. And the people who have grit will do the small things. Now we're getting into philosophy here.
No, it's good. I like it.
The people who have grit will do the small things to drive through. They'll do the things that they know they need to do to make this work, and they'll refuse to let the marriage fall apart. And people who don't have grit, the marriage is just going to fall apart because they won't do the hard things.
That's interesting. So there's a book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things, which is by a venture capitalist, which I listened to, and it talks a lot. There's things that are hard. You just got to get through them, and then and this is where it becomes philosophical. It's just, how can you it's going to be different for everyone, but that chip on that shoulder, whatever you're going to do to get through it, even though it's not worth it, or it is worth it, getting through it, you're going to just make it happen.
Absolutely.
So I don't know how to...
I think the last thing to say maybe here before we wrap up is that I think grit is also habitual. The more that you make decisions that are gritty, the more that you do hard things, the more wired you become to do hard things.
Very good point.
Not that it becomes easier, but it becomes almost a mindset shift where you see a hard thing, it doesn't matter, I'm going to do it.
Going through the building, we have a building company too, and just the things that we've been having issues with. I think in the beginning we had so many issues. We're like, maybe we should just shut this down. Now now we're in the midst of it where we're going to have issues, and we're going to have them every month, every 2 months, and now it's just like just tackle them instead of kind of having a choice that you can go this way or you can quit or you can succeed or whatever. There's no choice. It's just one road now. We got to succeed.
Right.
And that's a really good point. Is now that we have all these habits in place, and we just got to succeed. It's just another obstacle that you got to get through. But I like that, thinking that it starts really small. The grit starts really small. It starts with one successful habit, and that over, just like almost anything is when you build a business, it starts with doing one thing right, and then it just compounds.
Yep.
And that's how, when you look at someone, and when we're teaching our classes, I think sometimes some people get lost because what all the 400 transactions we close in a year, to someone that's doing 10, they get lost in all that compound interest that happened. And that's the same thing with grit. I think you're going to look back after 10, 20 years of just taking one thing at a time. You're going to be like, holy crap, that person has a lot of grit.
Right.
Versus where in the beginning, it doesn't necessarily, it's not.
All they did was they did the hard thing that was right in front of them.
Yes.
And then they did the hard thing that was right after that.
Exactly.
And that's all they had to focus on.
And they didn't get lost in what other people are doing. They didn't get lost in envy. They didn't get lost in all that. And they just focused on themselves and understood that the main competition out there isn't someone doing 400 transactions across the street. It's yourself. Because you can always get more transactions. You can always do more. It's not because the person over there does more.
Right.
So, very, very good points. Anyways, thanks for joining with us on another episode of the Teaming Up Show, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. We got 3 more today, I think we're going to do.
Yeah, we're excited.
We'll get all philosophical again on you.